My son ignored my calls for 4 years, not missed one or two, not forgot to call back after a busy afternoon. I mean ignored, the kind of silence that teaches a mother to stop expecting her own child's name to light up her phone. When my husband Thomas was dying at Riverside Hospital, I called Evan 11 times. His father kept turning his head toward the door, listening for footsteps that never came. 6 hours later, after Thomas was gone and the room had become too quiet to survive, Evan texted me one sentence. "Mom, I was in a meeting. You always make things sound worse than they are." When I slipped in my bathroom and lay on the tile for 43 minutes, I called him. When my basement flooded and his father's old boxes were floating in cold brown water, I called him. When the doctors told me I'd had a warning stroke and couldn't be alone that night, I called him 9 times from a hospital bed. He didn't answer, but I kept sending the money. $3,200 on the first of every month. Automatic, quiet, invisible. Evan said his business was just going through a rough patch. He said Lauren was stressed. He said Grace's school fees were higher than expected. He said family helped family. And because I was his mother, because I remembered the little boy who used to run to the door when I came home from work, because grief makes you hold on to whatever voice still calls you Mom, I paid. For 9 years, I thought I was helping my son stay afloat. Then at 1:13 on a Tuesday morning, my phone started ringing. Evan calling. I looked at the screen from my kitchen table, with a cup of untouched tea in front of me and a blue folder beside my hand. The folder had arrived that afternoon from my late husband's attorney. Inside were bank documents, loan papers, a forged signature, and a note in Thomas's handwriting that said, "For Maggie when she is ready to stop rescuing him." The phone rang again and again. By sunrise, my son had called me 47 times. On the last voicemail, his voice was not busy anymore. It was shaking. "Mom, please pick up. The bank froze everything. If you don't fix this before 9, I lose the house, I lose the company, I lose everything." I sat there in the gray morning light, listening to the son who had ignored every emergency I ever had finally discover one of his own. And for the first time in my life, I let him figure things out. The first time Evan stopped answering my calls, I made excuses for him. That is what mothers do before they admit the truth. We build little shelters out of reasonable explanations. He must be busy. He must be driving. His phone must be dead. Lauren probably needed him. Grace probably had something at school. The business was probably demanding more from him than I understood. And maybe some of those things were true. But truth has a way of turning cruel when you stack it high enough. 1 missed call is an accident. 3 missed calls are a busy day. 4 years of silence is a decision. My name is Margaret Whitaker, though almost everyone calls me Maggie. I was 67 years old when my only son called me 47 times before sunrise. Before that night, I lived alone in a small brick house on Maple Ridge Lane in Columbus, Ohio, the same house my husband Thomas and I bought when Evan was 6. It was not a grand house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a narrow porch Thomas repaired every spring while pretending he enjoyed it, and a maple tree in the front yard that dropped leaves into the gutters like it was being paid to annoy him. We paid that house off 6 months before Thomas died. He stood in the kitchen holding the final mortgage letter like it was a diploma. "No one can move you now, Maggie," he said. I remember laughing because I thought he meant the bank. I did not know then that sometimes the people most likely to take your home are the ones whose baby pictures are still in your hallway. Evan was not always the man who ignored me. That is the part people forget when they judge a mother for staying too long, giving too much, forgiving what should have been the final insult. They imagine the cruelty arrived fully grown, wearing a suit and asking for money. But it did not. It arrived as a little boy with scraped knees who used to wait by the screen door for me to come home from my shift at Riverside Hospital. I worked in billing for 31 years. Thomas was an electrician. We were tired most of the time, careful all of the time, and proud in the quiet way people are proud when they do not owe anyone anything. Evan used to crawl into my lap with library books and ask me to read the same dinosaur story until the spine gave out. He used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were expensive flowers. When he was 10, he told me, "When I'm rich, I'm going to buy you a house with a big porch." You already live in my house, I told him. Not like this, he said, serious as a banker. A fancy one. That boy was real. I have to say that because I loved him. I still loved him, even after everything. But somewhere between that boy and the man he became, Evan learned that my guilt was easier to access than a loan application. The first big request came when he was 24. He had just started his home renovation business, Whitaker Holdings, though back then it was just Evan in a used truck with magnet signs on the doors. He came to dinner wearing a button-down shirt Thomas had ironed for him, talking fast about opportunity, growth, a property near German Village that only needed cosmetic work. I just need a little bridge money, he said. How little? Thomas asked. Evan looked at me, not his father. 8,000. Thomas set his fork down. That's not little. It's temporary, Evan said quickly. 30 days, maybe 60. I already have a buyer interested. I looked across the table at my son. He looked nervous, hopeful, young. I remembered the boy at the screen door. I remembered the dandelions. We gave him the money. He did pay back part of it. Not all, but enough that I could pretend the missing portion was not a warning. That became the rhythm of our lives. Evan asked. Thomas hesitated. I softened. Money left our account wearing the costume of family support. After Evan married Lauren, the requests became more polished. Lauren came from people who used words like investment strategy and positioning when they meant debt. She was beautiful, organized, and very good at making needs sound like ambition. It's not like we're asking for a handout, she told me once, smiling over brunch I paid for. We're building something Grace can inherit someday. Grace was 2 then, asleep in a stroller beside the table, her fist curled under her cheek. My granddaughter, my weakness with my son's eyes. So I helped. 500 here, 1,200 there. A credit card payment Evan promised was because of cash flow timing. A private school deposit because Lauren said the public school district would limit Grace's potential. When Thomas questioned it, Evan would get quiet and wounded. I thought you believed in me, Dad. Thomas believed in work. I believed in rescue. Between the two of us, rescue usually won. Then Thomas got sick. Heart failure does not enter a house loudly. It comes in small humiliations. A chair halfway up the stairs, a pill organizer on the counter, a man who once rewired an entire church sanctuary needing help carrying laundry. During those years, Evan visited less. He called less. But he still needed money with impressive consistency. The first automatic transfer was my idea. $3,200 on the first of every month. Evan said it would help stabilize the business. I told Thomas it was easier than tracking every emergency. Thomas looked at me for a long time and said, Maggie, when everything is an emergency, nothing is. I told him he was being harsh. He did not argue. Thomas rarely argued when he knew I was protecting myself from a truth I was not ready to survive. He just opened the little black notebook he kept in his shirt pocket and wrote something down. I did not ask what it was. Years later, after the basement flooded, I found that notebook in a wet cardboard box. The ink had blurred on some pages, but one sentence remained sharp enough to cut. Evan has learned her guilt is cheaper than a bank loan. I sat on the basement steps with cold water soaking through my socks, holding my dead husband's handwriting in both hands. Upstairs, my phone lay silent on the kitchen counter. I had called Evan 4 times that night. The water was rising. Thomas's tools were down there, his old tax records, Christmas ornaments from when Evan was little, boxes I could not lift anymore. 2 hours later, Evan texted, "Call a plumber, Mom. I'm not close." Lauren posted a photo that same evening from a steakhouse 18 minutes from my house. The caption said, "Family night. Nothing matters more." I looked at those words until they stopped looking like words at all. Then I went back downstairs and carried the boxes up myself. 3 months after I found Thomas's notebook, I had what the emergency room doctor later called a transient ischemic attack, a warning stroke. Not the kind that leaves you unable to speak forever, the kind that whispers instead of screams, a numb hand, blurred vision, a sentence that refuses to finish itself. The kind doctors describe as lucky while handing you pamphlets that quietly explain how close you came to something much worse. I was buying soup at the grocery store when it happened. One moment I was comparing sodium labels. The next, the cans on the shelf looked like they were floating away from me. My shopping basket slipped from my hand, and I remember apologizing to no one in particular as it hit the floor. When I woke up properly, fluorescent lights stretched above me. A nurse with kind eyes smiled when she noticed I was awake. "Mrs. Whitaker? You're at Riverside. The ambulance brought you in about an hour ago." Riverside, the same hospital where I had spent half my working life balancing billing records, the same hospital where Thomas took his last breath. The irony wasn't lost on me. The doctor explained everything carefully. My scans looked encouraging, but they wanted someone to stay with me overnight after discharge. Living alone after a warning stroke wasn't considered safe. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked. "My son," I answered automatically. The word came out before the doubt. "He lives about 20 minutes away." "Perfect," the doctor said. "Give him a call." I smiled. I even believed it would be simple. The first call rang until voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm at Riverside Hospital. Nothing to panic about, but I'd appreciate it if you could come." I hung up. 5 minutes later, I called again. No answer. The third time, I texted. I stared at the screen. Delivered. No reply. The nurse returned with discharge paperwork. "Is your son on his way?" "He must be driving," I lied. She nodded politely, but I could see she had heard that sentence from lonely people before. An hour passed, then another. The room became painfully quiet except for the steady rhythm of monitors somewhere beyond the curtain. I called again and again. 9 calls. 9 opportunities for my son to answer. 9 reminders that silence can become a habit. Finally, my phone buzzed. My heart actually lifted. It wasn't Evan. It was my neighbor, Helen Brooks. She was 74, stubborn enough to shovel her own driveway every winter despite everyone's objections, and she somehow noticed my empty parking space before my own son noticed 9 missed calls. "Margaret," she said without even saying hello. "The grocery manager called the number on your rewards account. Are you all right?" I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because a woman who shared my fence knew I was missing before the child I raised did. Helen arrived 25 minutes later carrying my purse, a cardigan from my front closet, and a container of homemade chicken soup. "You'll stay with me tonight," she told the doctor before I could protest. No arguments. On the drive home, she didn't ask uncomfortable questions. She simply reached across the console at a red light and squeezed my hand. "Blood is important," she said quietly. "But showing up is more important." I looked out the passenger window because suddenly the passing traffic seemed much easier to watch than my own reflection. When we reached my house, Helen helped me inside, made tea, organized my medication, and taped the doctor's instructions to my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Before leaving the kitchen, she hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When was the last time Evan came here?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I honestly couldn't remember. Not Christmas, not my birthday, not after Thomas's funeral. Somewhere along the way, phone calls had quietly replaced visits. Then even the phone calls disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too still. Thomas's recliner sat exactly where he'd left it. His reading glasses were still inside the drawer beside it because I hadn't found the courage to move them. Around midnight, my phone finally buzzed. Evan. I answered before the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart." "Oh, good," he said quickly. "You picked up." "No, how are you?" "No, Mom, are you okay?" Just relief that I had answered. "I've been busy all day," he continued. "Lauren said you called a bunch of times. I was in the emergency room. Are you home now?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause. Then he cleared his throat. "I actually needed a favor." I closed my eyes. "I've got some paperwork coming through DocuSign tomorrow," he said. "It's just routine business stuff, insurance updates, bank requirements. Can you sign it right away? The lender's being a pain." I looked around my quiet kitchen. The soup Helen made was still warm on the stove. The flowers she had picked from her own garden sat in a glass beside the sink. My son had finally called after ignoring 9 calls from the hospital. Not because he thought he might have lost his mother, because he needed my signature. Of course, I heard myself say. Old habits survive longer than they deserve. The email arrived the following morning. I printed every page the way Thomas had taught me years ago. "Never sign what you haven't held in your own hands," he'd always said. Halfway through the stack, one line stopped me cold. "My home." Underneath it sat an electronic signature, my name, a signature I had never written. I stared at the signature for so long that the letters stopped belonging to me. Margaret E. Whitaker, that was my legal name. The name Thomas used when he was pretending to be formal. The name printed on our mortgage documents, our tax returns, our insurance forms, the deed to the house on Maple Ridge Lane. But the signature beneath that loan document was not mine. It leaned too far to the right. The W in Whitaker was too sharp. My middle initial sat too high, like someone had copied the idea of my handwriting without understanding the rhythm of it. For a few minutes I simply stood in my kitchen with one hand on the counter and the other pressed against my chest, as if I could hold my heart in place by force. Then the phone rang. Evan. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mom," he said too brightly. "Did you see the DocuSign?" "I printed it." A pause. "Printed it? Why?" "Because your father taught me not to sign anything I hadn't read." The silence that followed was small but telling. Then Evan laughed once, thin and impatient. "Okay, well, you don't have to make it into a whole project. It's routine. Why is my house listed as collateral?" This time he didn't laugh. "It's not like that. It says collateral property, 418 Maple Ridge Lane. Mom, these lenders use standard language. You wouldn't understand the structure." There it was. The voice he used when he wanted me to feel old, confused, grateful someone younger was managing the complicated world for me. I looked at the page again. "Did I sign a previous version of this?" "You agreed to help me years ago." "That wasn't my question." He exhaled sharply. "Why are you doing this today? I have a closing at 4. I need this handled." Handled. That word used to belong to me. I handled the bills when Thomas was sick. I handled the funeral home. I handled Evan's emergencies, Lauren's embarrassment, Grace's tuition, the silent first of every month when money left my account, and gratitude never came back. But standing there with my forged name on a document tied to my home, the word sounded different. It sounded like a leash. "I'm going to have someone look at it," I said. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. I'll call you after." "If you call some random lawyer, you're going to create a problem where there isn't one." "No," I said quietly. "I think I'm finding one." I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking by then, but not from fear. Not exactly. It was the strange tremor that comes when your body understands a truth before your heart is ready to admit it. I went to the hall closet and pulled down the metal file box Thomas had labeled in his blocky handwriting, House, Tax, Legal. Inside were folders arranged by year, rubber-banded receipts, insurance policies, old loan statements, and a sealed envelope I had never opened. On the front, in Thomas's handwriting, were 6 words. "For Maggie. When you're ready." I sat down on the hallway floor. For a long time, I did not touch it. Grief is strange that way. You can sleep beside an empty pillow for years, eat dinner across from an empty chair, keep a dead man's reading glasses in a drawer because moving them feels like losing him twice. But handwriting can still undo you in 1 second. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a business card. Ruth Caldwell, attorney at law, and beneath it a note from Thomas. "Megs, if you are reading this, it means Evan finally pushed past what you can explain away. I am sorry I could not make you see it while I was here. I tried. God knows I tried, but love is stubborn and yours was always stronger than your suspicion. Call Ruth. Do not warn Evan first. Please, Maggie, let someone protect you for once." I read the note 3 times. Then I placed it on the kitchen table beside the loan document, picked up the phone and called Ruth Caldwell. Her assistant answered first. I gave my name. The line went quiet. Then a woman's voice came on, older, low, very steady. "Margaret Whitaker?" "Yes." "I knew Thomas would leave you my card." My throat closed. "You knew my husband?" "For 26 years, she said. "And for the last 2 of them we spoke often." I looked at Thomas's note. "What did he talk to you about?" Ruth did not soften the answer. "Your son." The next morning I drove to her office with the loan papers in a folder on the passenger seat. Ruth Caldwell worked out of a narrow brick building downtown between a tax preparer and a watch repair shop. No marble lobby, no glass walls, just shelves of old law books, a coffee maker that sounded angry, and a woman with silver hair pinned at the back of her neck. She did not waste time. She read the loan document once, then again. Her face did not change, but her pen stopped moving when she reached my signature. "You didn't sign this." No. And you didn't authorize electronic signing? No. And this property is still in your name? I thought it was. Ruth looked up. That depends on what Evan has filed and what he has told the lender. We need to move carefully. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a blue folder. It was thick, worn at the edges, and labeled in Thomas's handwriting. Whitaker, Protective Trust, Evan Documentation. My husband had known. The room tilted slightly. Ruth rested one hand on the folder. Thomas didn't want to hurt you, she said, but he wanted you safe when the day came. What day? She slid the folder toward me. The day your son treated your home like it belonged to him. Ruth did not let me open the blue folder right away. First, she poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and placed one in front of me without asking if I wanted it. Then she closed the office door, lowered the blinds, and sat across from me with the patience of a woman who had watched people break in that chair before and knew rushing them only made the pieces sharper. Before you read what Thomas kept, she said, I need you to understand something. Your husband did not collect these documents because he hated Evan. I know that. No, she said gently. You need to really know it, because your son is going to use that against you. He will tell you this is betrayal. He will tell you Thomas misunderstood. He will tell you grief made your husband paranoid. And when that happens, you must remember Thomas acted out of protection, not revenge. The word protection landed harder than I expected. For years, I had been the one protecting everyone else, protecting Evan from failure, protecting Lauren from embarrassment, protecting Grace from instability, protecting Thomas from stress while his heart weakened inside his chest. I had not noticed that somewhere along the way, no one was protecting me. Ruth opened the folder. The first few pages were bank statements. My bank statements, though I had never given them to her. Thomas must have copied them from the household files before he died. Transfers to Evan circled in blue ink, notes in the margin, dates, amounts, promises Evan had made and failed to keep. $1,500 roof repair not repaid. $4,800 Grace tuition deposit claimed emergency. $12,000 truck replacement business expense. $3,200 month Maggie set recurring. Evan now dependent. I turned page after page, watching 9 years of my life become a ledger. My throat burned. Thomas knew about the monthly transfer? Ruth nodded. He knew. He hated it, but he also knew you weren't ready to stop. I looked down at my hands. That makes me sound foolish. No, Ruth said. It makes you sound like a mother. That almost broke me. The next section of the folder was worse. Emails, printed and dated, one from Evan to Thomas sent 2 years before Thomas died. Dad, stop making Mom nervous about the business. She wants to help. If you keep questioning everything, you're going to scare her into thinking I'm using her. Another, Mom will sign if you don't turn it into a federal case. She trusts me. And then the one that made the room go very cold. Once the house is available as backing, I can restructure everything and get breathing room. The house, not my mother's house, not Mom's home, not the place where he had taken his first steps, where Thomas had measured his height against the pantry door every September, where I still kept the chipped blue mug Evan made in 2nd grade. Just the house, available as backing. I pressed my fingertips to the paper and tried to make my voice work. Did Thomas see this? Yes. When? About 8 months before he died. I closed my eyes. 8 months. While I was measuring pills, driving Thomas to cardiology appointments, pretending not to notice when he gripped the kitchen counter to catch his breath, my husband had been carrying this alone. Ruth slid another document toward me. This is what he did after. It was a trust agreement. I did not understand all the language, but Ruth walked me through it slowly. Thomas had transferred his portion of our assets into a protective trust. After his death, the trust gave me full use of everything for my lifetime, but it restricted anyone else from borrowing against, selling, pledging, or transferring the home without my direct, verified, notarized consent. And because the deed adjustment was completed before this new loan application, Ruth said, tapping the page, Evan may have represented collateral he had no legal authority to offer. My stomach turned. What happens now? That depends on what you want. I want my house safe. Then we start there. She made a list on a yellow legal pad. First, we would notify the lender in writing that I had not signed the documents. Second, I would sign an affidavit denying authorization of the electronic signature. Third, we would freeze any pending use of the home as collateral. Fourth, I would cancel the monthly transfer. That last one should have felt easy. It did not. Ruth watched my face and softened. Margaret, cutting off money is not the same as cutting off love. I looked toward the window where traffic moved beyond the blinds in little flashes of color. He's my only child. And you are his only mother, she said. Not his bank, not his collateral, not his emergency exit. I took the pen. My hand shook when I signed the affidavit, but my signature was mine. Slow, familiar, slightly rounded, a signature no one had borrowed, no one had copied. No one had tilted too sharply to the right. That evening, I went home with copies of everything in a plain envelope tucked under my arm. The house was dark when I stepped inside. For a moment, I stood in the entryway and listened to the quiet, the refrigerator humming, the old clock in the living room, the familiar creak of wood settling under my feet. This was not just a house. It was Thomas's last promise. No one can move you now, Maggie. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my banking app, and found the transfer I had been afraid to touch for 9 years. Evan support, $3,200, monthly active. My thumb hovered over the screen. I thought of the hospital bed, the 9 unanswered calls, the forged signature, the blue folder, Thomas's note. Let someone protect you for once. I pressed cancel. A message appeared. Recurring transfer canceled. The house stayed silent. Then, 12 minutes later, my phone rang. Evan calling. The first call came 12 minutes after I canceled the transfer. I let it ring. That may sound small to someone who has never been trained by love to answer every emergency. But to me, sitting alone at my kitchen table with Thomas's blue folder beside my elbow, watching my son's name flash on the screen and doing nothing, felt like stepping off a bridge and discovering the air could hold me. The call stopped. Then came the text. Mom, did something happen with the transfer? I looked at the words for a long time. How polite panic can sound when it still thinks it is in control. I did not answer. The second call came 3 minutes later, then a third. On the fourth, I picked up. Mom, Evan said, his voice already tight. The transfer didn't come through. I know. What do you mean, you know? I canceled it. Silence. Not the empty silence he had given me from hospital rooms and flooded basements. This silence was full of calculation, full of his mind rearranging me into something less convenient. Why would you do that? He asked carefully. Because I needed to see what stood after I stopped holding it up. He laughed once, ugly and short. Okay, so this is about the hospital thing. The hospital thing? You had a scare. You're emotional. I get it. But you don't punish your family because I missed a few calls. A few calls. I looked at the blue folder. At the affidavit Ruth had copied for me. Then at the line where my house had been offered like loose change from someone else's pocket. I called you 9 times from the emergency room, I said. I was busy. Yes, I said. I remember. He exhaled. Mom, I don't have time for this. Lauren is already upset. Payroll is due tomorrow. I've got contractors waiting. Can you just send it manually this month and we'll talk later? There it was. The entire relationship folded into one sentence. Pay now. Feel later. No. The word left my mouth so cleanly I almost did not recognize my own voice. Evan went quiet. Then his tone changed. Lower, sharper. Do you understand what happens if you don't fix this? Yes. No, you don't. You sit in that house watching old movies and balancing checkbooks like it's still 1998. You don't understand how business works. I looked around the kitchen Thomas and I had painted ourselves 20 years ago. The cabinets were old. The clock was slow. The table had a burn mark from a Thanksgiving pie I once dropped. It was not impressive, but it was mine. I understand collateral, I said. Another silence. This one frightened him. What did you say? I said I understand collateral. Mom, and signatures. His breath changed on the line. For the first time in years, my son had nothing ready. I talked to Ruth Caldwell, I said. The silence became absolute. Then he whispered, Why would you do that? Because you forged my name. I thought. Because your father saw you more clearly than I did. Because you answered the phone only when the money stopped. But I did not say any of that. I had questions, I said. She had documents. His voice came back loud. You need to stop, right now. Whatever she told you, she's twisting it. Dad was sick. He was paranoid at the end. You know that. I closed my eyes. Ruth had warned me. He will tell you grief made your husband paranoid. No, Evan, I said. Your father was protective. He hung up. For the rest of the day, my phone buzzed in little waves. Evan, Lauren, Evan again. Then Lauren with a message long enough to be a sermon. Maggie, I know you're lonely, but destabilizing your son's family is not okay. Grace is stressed. Evan is under pressure. You need to think about someone besides yourself. I almost laughed at that. Someone besides myself had been my entire life. By evening, Ruth called to tell me the lender had received my affidavit. The pending credit extension tied to my home was frozen while they reviewed the signatures and documentation. Do not answer him tonight unless you want to, she said. What will happen? To Evan? Yes. Consequences, Ruth said, a thing he appears to have avoided for some time. At 1:13 that morning, the real calls began. The first one pulled me from a shallow sleep. I saw Evan's name and turned the phone face down. It rang again and again. By the 10th call, I got out of bed, put on my robe, and made tea. By the 22nd, I opened Thomas's old notebook and began writing tally marks on a blank page. By the 31st, Lauren texted, "Please answer. This is cruel. Cruel, not forging my signature, not ignoring the hospital, not letting me sit beside Thomas's cooling hand while our son sat in a meeting. Cruel was apparently what they called it when the safety net developed a boundary." At 5:42 a.m., after the 47th call, Evan left a voicemail. His voice was ruined. "Mom, please pick up. The bank froze everything. Lauren's cards aren't working. The contractor is threatening a lien. If I don't get this cleared by 9, I lose the Lakewood property. I lose the company. I lose everything. Just call them and say it was a misunderstanding. Please, you're my mother." I listened to it once, then again. Not because I enjoyed his fear. I did not. That is the thing people rarely understand about quiet endings. They do not feel like victory. They feel like standing in the ashes of a house you spent years trying to keep warm. At 7, I called Ruth. By noon, Evan had sent a message to the family group. "We need to talk about Mom. She's not well. She's trying to destroy my family." By 6 that evening, they were all in my living room. Evan stood by the fireplace like a man about to lead a meeting. Lauren sat beside him, pale and furious. My sister-in-law Diane perched on the sofa with her arms crossed. Grace stood near the hallway, quiet, watching me with worried eyes. Ruth sat beside me with the blue folder on her lap. Evan began softly, "Mom, we love you, but this has gone too far." I nodded. Then I placed one sheet of paper on the coffee table, a call log. On the left side were the calls I made when I needed my son. Thomas's death, 11 calls. Bathroom fall, 6 calls. Flooded basement, 4 calls. Emergency room, 9 calls. On the right side was one night. Evan, 47 calls. I looked at my son. For 4 years I said I called when I needed you. Last night you called 47 times when you needed my house. No one spoke. So I opened the blue folder. Ruth opened the blue folder with the calm hands of a woman who had spent her entire career watching loud people lose to paper. Evan took one step forward. "Mom, don't do this." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The expensive watch, the tired eyes, the jaw clenched the way Thomas's used to clench when he was trying not to say what he knew. For 1 second, I saw my little boy again, standing on the porch with a fistful of dandelions, telling me they were expensive flowers. That was the cruelest part. The child had been real, so had the man. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm showing everyone what you did to me." Ruth placed the first document on the coffee table. "This is the home equity paperwork submitted by Whitaker Holdings," she said. "It lists Margaret's home as collateral." Diane leaned forward. "Collateral for what?" "A business credit extension," Ruth said. $275,000. Lauren's face went white. "Evan," she whispered. "You said your mother agreed." Evan did not look at her. Ruth placed the second page beside the first. "This is the electronic signature attached to the application. Margaret has signed an affidavit stating she did not authorize it." "That's not what happened," Evan snapped. Ruth did not raise her voice. "Then you'll have an opportunity to explain that to the lender." The room changed after that. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was more like a floor giving way beneath a beautiful rug. Everyone was still sitting in the same places, but nothing was standing where it had been a minute earlier. Grace moved first. She walked to the table and looked down at the papers. "Dad," she said very softly, "did Grandma really pay for my school?" Evan closed his eyes. That was answer enough. I reached for my granddaughter's hand. "Some of it, sweetheart, but none of that was your fault." Grace's fingers tightened around mine. Lauren stood up then, one hand over her mouth, staring at Evan like she was seeing a stranger wearing her husband's clothes. "You told me your mother wanted to help," she said. "You told me she insisted." Evan's control cracked. "She did want to help. She always helped. That's what families do." "No," I said. "That's what I did." He turned on me then, desperate enough to be honest and cruel at the same time. "You had the money. You had the house. You were alone. What else were you doing with it?" There it was. The sentence behind every unanswered call, the belief beneath every request. My life, to him, was empty storage. My savings were unused. My house was backing. My silence was consent. My loneliness was something he could invoice. For years I had wondered when my son stopped seeing me. Now I understood. He had seen me clearly. He had simply seen something useful. Ruth placed the final document on the table. "This is the protective trust Thomas Whitaker created before his death," she said. "The house cannot be pledged, borrowed against, transferred, or sold without Margaret's verified notarized consent." Evan had no authority to offer it. Diane covered her mouth. Grace started crying. Lauren sat back down as if her legs had stopped working. Evan stared at the document, and for the first time that night he looked afraid not of losing money, but of losing the story in which he was a good son under pressure and I was an emotional old woman making trouble. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. "Please." That word would have undone me once. Please. I had written checks for please. I had forgiven silence for please. I had turned my own needs into background noise, because pleas from my child could still reach the youngest part of me. But not that night. "You called me 47 times, I said. "Not because you missed me. Not because you were worried about my health. Not because you remembered I was your mother. You called because the bank finally said no." He looked down. "I gathered the call log and placed it on top of the trust. I am not paying your debt. I am not calling the lender. I am not signing another document, and you are no longer my emergency." The room was so quiet I could hear the old clock ticking on the mantel. Evan left without saying goodbye. Lauren followed him after a minute, but Grace stayed. She came to me, folded herself carefully into my arms, and cried into my shoulder like the child she still was. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. I kissed her hair. "You don't carry what adults chose. That was the first night in years I slept without my phone beside my pillow. What happened afterward was not clean, because real consequences rarely are." The lender investigated. Evan's account stayed frozen long enough for 2 contractors to file liens. He sold the Lakewood property at a loss. The company survived, barely, but not in the shape he had bragged about online. Lauren took Grace to her mother's house for 6 weeks. Evan sent me angry texts at first, then desperate ones, then nothing. 3 months later he called once. I answered because I wanted to, not because I had to. "I didn't think you'd pick up," he said. "Neither did I." He breathed into the silence for a while. "I built everything around you catching me," he said finally. It was not a full apology, but it was the first true sentence he had given me in years, so I gave him one back. "I spent too long calling that love. Grace still comes every Saturday. We bake, we garden, we talk about Thomas. Her college fund now sits in a trust Evan cannot touch. My house is quiet again, but it is no longer lonely in the same way. Sometimes my phone rings and Evan's name appears. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. And that is the peace nobody tells you about. Peace is not revenge. It is not watching someone suffer. It is realizing the phone can ring, and you can still choose yourself before you pick it up. My son ignored my calls for years. Then he called me 47 times in one night. And by the 48th silence, I finally heard myself.